She waited until the server walked away before she said it. We were sitting in a booth at the back of a Tim Hortons, not even a real restaurant, a Tim Hortons, and my mother folded her hands on the table like she was about to deliver a verdict. Which, I suppose, she was. "Your grandmother left the bakery to both of us equally," she said, her voice so flat it almost sounded bored. "But I've decided it makes more sense for your brother to take it over. He has a family to support. You're still figuring things out." I was 26. I had been working inside that bakery every weekend since I was 9 years old. I knew how to proof dough at 2 in the morning in a Canadian January when the heating unit broke. I knew every regular customer by name, by order, by the small details they mentioned once and expected you to remember. My grandmother had taught me everything she knew, and in the last 3 years of her life, when her hands had gotten too stiff to roll pastry the way she liked, I was the one who did it for her. My brother had shown up to help exactly twice that I could count. Once for a Christmas promotion, and once because he needed to borrow money from the till and thought showing his face first would soften the ask. I looked at my mother across the laminate table and I did not cry. I had spent a long time learning not to cry in front of her because tears only ever made her feel vindicated. "Okay," I said. She blinked. I think she expected more of a fight. "Okay," she repeated back to me like she was testing the word. "I heard you." She picked up her coffee. "I knew you'd understand. You've always been the sensible one." I drove home in silence. My apartment was a 20-minute drive from the bakery, and I had made that drive probably 10,000 times in my life. I knew every light, every pothole on Wellington Street, the place where the road dips near the old rail crossing. When I got home, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while without getting out. Then I called my grandmother's lawyer. Her name was Miss Tran, and she had handled my grandmother's affairs for almost 15 years. I had met her once at the reading of the will, a quiet woman with a silver streak in her hair who had looked at my mother a little longer than necessary when the will was read aloud. I asked her to walk me through everything again. She did. The bakery, the building, the equipment, the business license, the commercial lease had been left to me, not equally, not to both of us. To me, specifically, by name in terms that were not ambiguous. My grandmother had been very clear, Miss Tran said, and the word she used was very. My mother had either not understood what she heard that day, or she had understood perfectly and decided it didn't matter. I thanked Miss Tran and sat with that information for a long time. Here is what I knew about my brother. He was 31, he had a good job in sales, he owned a semi-detached in Canada that he complained about constantly but also mentioned whenever he wanted to establish credibility. His wife was pleasant in the particular way of someone who has decided that staying pleasant is the easiest way to get through family events. They had 2 kids, both under 5. My mother adored them with a specific intensity she had never applied to me, and I don't say that bitterly anymore. It's just a fact I made my peace with around age 14. Here is what I also knew. My brother had zero interest in running a bakery. He would be interested in owning one. Those are different things. I did not tell my mother what I had learned from Miss Tran. I did not call my brother. I went to the bakery the next morning at 5:30, the same time I always arrived, and I made the bread. The weeks that followed were strange. My mother would call occasionally and make references to the transition, to my brother getting up to speed, to how she hoped I would be cooperative during the handover period. I listened. I asked neutral questions. I said things like, "That sounds like a lot to coordinate, and I'm sure you'll figure it out." Nothing that could be called agreement, nothing that could be called refusal. Meanwhile, I met with Miss Tran again. I met with my own lawyer, a man named Mr. Bergeron, who operated out of an office above a pharmacy in Nepean and who had the very useful quality of never seeming surprised by anything. I also met with my bank. The bakery had been in my grandmother's family for 43 years. It was not a trendy place. It was not the kind of place that got written up in food magazines or had a line out the door for a limited edition croissant. It was the kind of place where people came on Saturday morning because they had been coming on Saturday morning since before their kids were born. The revenue was modest and steady, like a good foundation, not exciting but solid in a way that some things built on excitement are not. Over the previous 2 years, with my grandmother's blessing, I had been quietly doing things. I had renegotiated the commercial lease. I had upgraded the point-of-sale system and started tracking sales data seriously. I had brought in a small wholesale contract with 2 local cafes that bought our sourdough loaves 3 days a week. I had also incorporated a numbered company that held the equipment I had personally purchased to replace the old pieces that had worn out. That incorporation had happened 14 months before my grandmother passed, with her full knowledge and a signed acknowledgement from her that the equipment belonged to me. I did not advertise any of this. The morning my mother arrived at the bakery with my brother and his wife, I was behind the counter serving Mrs. Kowalski, who came in every Thursday for a poppy seed roll and stayed for 15 minutes to talk about her garden. My mother walked in like she owned the place, which in her mind I think she genuinely believed. "We just thought we'd come take a look," she said, smiling at Mrs. Kowalski in a way that did not include me. "Family business." "Of course," I said. I finished wrapping Mrs. Kowalski's order and handed it over with a smile that I meant. Mrs. Kowalski looked between me and my mother with the practiced discretion of a woman who has witnessed decades of human behavior and knows better than to comment. My brother walked around the front of the bakery with his hands in his jacket pockets, nodding at things like he was evaluating a property. His wife stood near the door and looked at her phone. My mother went behind the counter without asking, just stepped around me like I was a fixture, and opened the door to the back kitchen. "This is where the magic happens," she announced to no one in particular. I watched her and said nothing. There was a lot I could have said. I had learned by then that the most effective thing was often to say nothing and let people keep talking. The visit lasted about an hour. My brother asked me questions about daily revenue and supplier contracts with the air of someone who has watched a few YouTube videos about small business and now considers himself informed. I answered in broad strokes, friendly and vague. My mother talked about renovations she thought could modernize the space. Her specific suggestions were a chalkboard menu and plants. When they left, my brother clapped me on the shoulder and said, "It's going to be great having this in the family properly." I smiled. "I'm sure it will be." That night I called Miss Tran. Over the next 3 weeks, we prepared the paperwork. It was not complicated because my grandmother's will was not complicated. The bakery, meaning the business license, the commercial lease, the goodwill, the name, had been left to me. What I needed to do was simply step fully into what was already mine. I also wrote a very detailed letter to my bank formalizing the operational account in my name alone, because while it had always been in my grandmother's name and mine jointly, it had quietly remained that way out of inertia. And inertia was something I was no longer willing to rely on. Meanwhile, my mother called to tell me she had booked an appointment with a business broker. "Just to understand the value," she said. "Your brother wants to know what he's working with." "That makes sense," I said. "He might want to bring a partner, someone with more business experience. To help him get started." "That sounds like a plan," I said. I was very careful in these conversations not to lie. I did not confirm that my brother was getting the bakery. I did not say anything that could be construed as agreement. I was agreeable, which is different. I have since thought about this distinction quite a lot. The broker my mother hired called me to arrange a walkthrough. I told him I would need to verify his authorization in writing before allowing access to the premises, as I was the sole operator of record. He seemed puzzled. I gave him Miss Tran's contact information. I don't know exactly what conversation happened between Miss Tran and the broker, but he did not come by. My mother called me 2 days later. It was 7 in the morning and I was at the bakery, which is where I am at 7 in the morning. "What did you say to the broker?" "I asked him to confirm his authorization in writing," I said. "Standard practice for commercial access." "He says you blocked him." "I asked him to confirm his authorization in writing," I said again. There was a long pause. Nora. She had a specific way of saying my name when she thought I was being difficult, as though the 2 syllables contained a whole argument she was too tired to make. "Your brother is counting on this." "I know he is," I said, "but I think there's been some confusion about the will. You might want to talk to Ms. Tran." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean, confusion?" "I mean, I think it would be worth talking to Ms. Tran," I said. "I have a batch in the oven, I'll call you later." I didn't call her later, she called me, 7 times before noon. I let the calls go to voicemail. The conversation that eventually happened was at my mother's house, at her request, and my brother was there too, which I had expected. His wife had stayed home with the kids, which I had also expected. She was smart enough to know when something was going to be unpleasant. My mother had clearly spoken with Miss Tran by then, or at least tried to, because the register of her voice had shifted from dismissive to something that was trying very hard to stay controlled. "The lawyer says the bakery was left directly to you," she said. "Yes, that's not what I understood." "I know," I said. "But that's what the will says." My brother leaned forward. He had the particular expression of a man who has spent his whole life being told he was exceptional, and is now encountering a situation that does not reflect that back to him. Gran would have wanted this to stay in the family, he said. It is in the family, I said. It's mine. You know what I mean. I really don't, I said. And I think if you check with Miss Tran, you'll see that Grandma's was very specific about her wishes. She didn't leave it vague. She knew exactly what she was doing. My mother made a sound, not quite a word, more of a compressed exhale, that I recognized from childhood. It was the sound she made when a situation had stopped going the way she planned and she needed a moment to regroup. You could sell it to him, she said finally. At a fair price. Family price. My brother nodded. We'd pay fair market. I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, I'm not interested in selling, Nora. I built the wholesale contracts, I said. I renegotiated the lease. I replaced 4 pieces of equipment with my own money. I've been there since I was 9 years old. I'm not selling. My brother stood up. He was not a violent person, I want to be clear about that. But he'd stood up in the particular way of someone who has confused height with authority for most of his life. This is incredibly selfish, he said. You know that? You live alone, you have no kids, you don't need. Sit down, I said. He sat down. I think he surprised himself I did not raise my voice. I had promised myself a long time ago that I was done performing emotions for people who had decided in advance how they felt about me. I am not selling the bakery, I said. That's my final answer on that. But I do want to say something else. I looked at my mother. You told me Grandma left it to both of us. You knew that was not true, and you said it anyway. I'd like you to think about that. She did not respond. She looked at the table. I drove back to my apartment, and that night I slept better than I had in weeks. The months that followed were not quiet exactly, but they settled. My brother stopped calling after about 6 weeks. My mother called less often, and the calls became shorter and more factual. Holiday plans, family updates, the kind of information that can be exchanged without requiring either of us to pretend we had resolved anything. We hadn't. But we had arrived at a kind of truce that was sustainable, which sometimes is the best you can get. The bakery had a good year. The wholesale contract expanded. One of the cafes asked if we could add a weekend cinnamon bun delivery, which we could, and which became unexpectedly popular enough that I hired a part-time weekend baker. Her name is Joelle, and she is much better at laminated dough than I am, which I am grateful for. I also started a small catering arm, not ambitious, just corporate office orders, the kind of thing that comes in consistent and pays on time. It is not glamorous, but it is the kind of revenue that lets you sleep. One Thursday in October, Mrs. Kowalski came in for her usual role and mentioned she had seen my mother at the grocery store. She said my mother had seemed tired. She said it the way she says everything, without judgment, as a fact she thought I might want to have. Thank you for telling me, I said. You know, she said, tucking the paper bag under her arm, your grandmother was very proud of you. She told me that many times. She said you were the only one who actually understood what this place was. I didn't trust my voice right away, so I took a second before I responded. I know, I said finally. She told me too. The winter morning light was coming through the front window at the angle it always does in November, hitting the glass display case and scattering. The bread was out and cooling. The coffee was fresh. In about 40 minutes, the first real rush of the morning would come through the door, and I would know most of them by name. There are people who will tell you that holding on isn't worth the cost. That family piece matters more than property, more than principle, more than the thing your grandmother spent 43 years building, and specifically, deliberately, left to you by name. I am not one of those people. Not because I wanted war with my family, I didn't, and I still don't, but because I understood standing in that Tim Hortons booth watching my mother fold her hands, that the cost of letting that moment pass unchallenged was not peace. It was just a different kind of losing. I unlocked the front door at 6:30, the same way I had done 1,000 times, and I turned the sign from closed to open. That felt like enough.